Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. This is Keeper of the Games.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for listening to Keeper of the Games. We are the podcast that's focused on sports and sports topics in the air capital, Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. I'm Tommy Castor, along with Weston Mills. It is 4th of July week. We are officially into the month of July. It's Independence Day weekend coming up in just a couple of days. A lot going on. And, you know, I guess the only kind of bummer about everything is that right about this time of year, we'd be talking about, you know, baseball in full swing. We're not there quite yet, obviously, because of COVID-19 and everything happening in the world today. But I don't know about you, Weston. It just seems like the last 3.5 months or so have gone by really slowly, but somehow we happen to be in July. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to put it, because I feel like, well, they've gone along slowly. If you look back and think about like the start of, you know, you and I having the conversation about March Madness and no fans, like that was going to be just the most wild thing, no fans. That feels like ages ago, you know? So while it does feel both like it's crept along, it also just feels like forever ago that we were kind of starting this new normal that we're living in.
You know, I mentioned to you before we came on the air, I was really excited about rocking my new USA Ryder Cup hat that the Ryder Cup squad wore in 2018 against the Europeans. Got it in the mail a couple of days ago. And for those of you who are watching this episode on YouTube or on Facebook, you'll notice that it's backwards. So it looks like ASU. It doesn't look like USA. But little disappointed, a little bit let down, but I'm not going to let that get to me today.
Yeah, I mean, I had a Chiefs hat on before we started the show and had to do a quick wardrobe change just because it felt too hot. I got right out of the shower and so I think we were both struggling right off the bat.
Yeah, there you go. So, of course, we've got a lot to get to on this new episode of Keeper of the Games. And again, we want to thank you for listening, for checking out the podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode of the podcast, you'll get a notification. You can find us on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, pretty much anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And that's going to be important, Weston, for folks to hit subscribe, because we've changed up the schedule a little bit for the next few weeks or so. And so if you don't hit subscribe, you won't get a notification. You might miss an episode. We certainly don't want that to happen.
Yeah, we're going to be doing, and we tweeted it out from the main account today, but we will be, for the next 3 weeks, dropping episodes on Wednesdays leading up to, and then obviously this is changing as it has been for over the last few months, but we're kind of hopeful that maybe at the end of those 3 weeks, we might be able to go back to a 2 episode a week schedule, with hopefully sports kind of being back in the swing or right on the crest of being back in. So we're hopeful.
Yeah, we haven't done a 2 episode per week schedule, I think, since the end of March. And so it's been quite a while since we've done that. We've kind of been limiting it to once a week just because there hasn't been as much to talk about in a world without sports. So make sure to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. That way you'll get a notification the next 3 shows, so you know exactly when we have a new episode drop. Also, if you want to watch full episodes of Keeper of the Games, you can find us on Facebook and YouTube and watch those full episodes just by searching for Keeper of the Games. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's at KOG Pod. Our website, by the way, is cogpod.weebly.com. And also a special thanks to our sponsor, Title Boxing Club, at 21st and Rock Road in the shops at Tallgrass. You can definitely go in and check them out. They're reopened now with some great specials going on right now. So make sure to go check them out on the northeast side of Wichita if you want a great workout. Title Boxing Club, 21st and Rock Road. So with all of that out of the way, Weston, you ready to get into it? A lot to talk about, a lot of big topics on this episode.
Yeah, we do. It's it's been kind of amazing that we started this podcast with no sports, and I feel like for the most part, actually, we've had quite a bit of to talk about when things have been going on. There's been a lot of moving and shaking, whether it's free agency or just off-season buzz and those kind of things. And I guess I'll call it off the field stories, but a lot going on and definitely a lot going on for today's episode.
Yeah, without a doubt. So we're going to get right into it. In our top story, we kind of adjusted it on the fly just about a couple of hours ago. Word came down that minor league baseball canceling the full 2020 season, which is not a total shock. It's not a total surprise, but yet it's still disappointing for sure, because that does include the inaugural season of the Wichita Wind Surge at Riverfront Stadium, the brand new stadium in downtown Wichita. So, in light of what's happening with Major League Baseball, and the fact that the season for the majors was going to be shortened, and the extended player rosters for all of these teams, all across the country in Major League Baseball, it just didn't seem logistically possible for the minors to have a season. And I think we were just kind of waiting for that confirmation to come out. It is a bummer, but I guess closure is better than not knowing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we both were had some sort of hope that they'd figure something out, but I think we kind of both were under the impression that there just wasn't going to be able to work this out, especially the further and further that the MLBPA and MLB drug on their negotiations. It just seemed even more unlikely that the minor leaguers would be able to get a chance to get out there and play. And I've seen at least one bit of buzz, I guess, on Twitter from some of the minor league players, saying, hey, maybe it's time for us to have some representation here, that, the MLBPA maybe is not always looking out for the minor league players and their best interest. And with that being said, not that this was handled in a manner in which, was detrimental to them. I mean, they're not playing. Obviously, that's not great. But also, I'm not sure what the risk for some of those guys that are in the minor leagues and not making $400, $500 a month. That's low, but I know they don't make much. For those guys going out there and risking kind of what's going on in the world just probably wasn't going to make sense, even outside of the businesses knowing that they were probably going to lose money if they were to roll those players out.
How much is Major League Baseball as a whole, the entire hierarchy, the ownership, the players, how much blame should they shoulder for these minor leaguers? In a lot of cases, a lot of them not getting to play baseball at all this year. The delays that happened, the disputes that were going on between both parties. We've talked about it at length on this program. If it were me and I'm looking back on it, if I were a minor leaguer that didn't get picked to be in one of these player pools across the entire big leagues, I'd be pretty pissed off at both Major League Baseball and the Players Union for fighting amongst themselves over money and over some other things too, but primarily money. And now, because of all the delays and just the logistics involved, I'm not going to be able to play a season. That would make me pretty mad.
Yeah, and I mean, with that being said too, and I agree with that, but with that being said too, it seems odd. I'm wondering if it's one of those situations where we need to wait on a little bit more information to come out, because, you see, Legion baseball being played, you see youth baseball being played. Like, there has got to be some way for these guys to be at least playing competitive games against each other, even if there's no standings involved. There's no, I don't know what they're going to do with paying these players. And I guess that's probably a part of it too, right? Is that, there were some organizations that cut a lot of minor league players, or some that weren't paying. Most were, I think, at this point, kind of paying the minor leaguers, or at least some of them. But you got to imagine, just for the developmental standpoint of these players, teams are going to want these guys doing something. Now, granted, they're still professional baseball players, so they'll be expected to, take at bats, whether it's in a cage or doing grounders, those sort of things. I mean, they'll be still fine-tuning their skills, but it's just not the same as playing an actual game. So I'm wondering if they'll come up with some creative way to at least get these guys playing against each other, almost if it's even like a grapefruit league type setting or something like that.
I think it kind of, to me at least, this whole thing is explained the way that Major League Baseball works, and the way that in relation to the minor leagues. And, I think the wording, I don't know if you saw the quote from, I believe he's the CEO of Minor League Baseball from the big organization. And his comment said something to the extent of, Major League Baseball made us aware today that they would not be making the players available to play for our teams. And I thought that was a striking quote to me, because I think too often we know that these players and the teams are affiliated with Major League Baseball, but in theory, I mean, not in theory, in reality, these players have contracts with the parent club, with the big league club, and the teams are affiliated with other minor league squads and make those players available to those squads. So really, the control or the power or the authority does not lie with the minor league teams. It lies with the parent organizations, which we all knew that, but this is one of those examples where that really comes into play, because you don't think about it an awful lot. You think, well, this guy's playing for the Wichita Wind Surge. They're a AAA team. He's going to get called up. Really, it's kind of like the big leagues are loaning or leasing these players, to these minor league squads. And again, you just never think about it. But I thought that quote was really telling, that really in reality, Major League Baseball just basically said, look, you guys can do what you want, but we're not going to make these players available for you this season. So obviously that left those teams in a bind. They're not going to have players. So of course they're not going to have a season.
Yeah. And of course it's unfortunate enough for those guys, especially, a lot that were, whether it's the guys that were just drafted or the guys that are, just really trying to work their way up. And I mean, it's a grind to get through the minor leagues and make it to the major league. So being set back, especially, I had a friend from high school who he was in the minor leagues until he was, probably 28 or 29 and finally hung it up. And when you're that old in the minor leagues, essentially, you're starting to look at it like, hey, I just probably not going to have a shot to get called up. So to be a 27, 28, 29-year-old minor leaguer and know that that's just one less season, you're going to get a year older, just knowing that potentially could end your career, is really unfortunate. But so, and of course we all look at it that way. But the other thing too, going back to Wichita, how unfortunate, and Tommy, we've talked about this really multiple times already on this podcast, so it's not like we're going to say anything new today that we haven't been saying, but how unfortunate for the city of Wichita to really build up this brand new stadium. And that's the other thing too, because it is a new stadium, it feels even more, detrimental. Maybe that's too much of a word, but if it was like, the old, if they just had the old ballpark, or for any city, and they're bringing the guys back, even if it was a first year, like it just doesn't feel as much as all this buildup, new team, new stadium, renovation around the riverfront. And then to not have that moment, it seems like such a letdown and so disappointing. I'm disappointed for really the baseball fans in Wichita and the city itself.
This is not a political talk show. We're not going to get into politics at all. But I do have to wonder, how does former mayor of Wichita, Jeff Longwell, feel right now? He was the guy that championed this from day one. Part of the really big, one of the big issues that he campaigned on, that he really led Wichita in, was getting an affiliated baseball team back to Wichita and building a brand new stadium to do so. He did that. He led that charge. In a lot of cases, I think he alienated himself from a lot of people in the community who didn't want to pay more in taxes and, that sort of thing. Whenever there's new development, economically, taxpayers are going to be paying more. That's just kind of the way that it is. And ultimately, I think a lot of people would say that part of the reason why he was defeated in re-election just a few months ago by newcomer in politics, Brandon Whipple, was because of him leading the charge to build a brand new stadium in downtown Wichita and bring an affiliated baseball team back. In fact, the entire tagline of the entire project was Wichita Baseball 2020. Well, there's not going to be Wichita baseball in 2020. That's not his fault. Nobody could have predicted that. But at the same time, now you've got a brand new multi-million-dollar facility in downtown Wichita that is pretty much going to set empty. I know a lot of people are saying we're going to try to do some events in the fall. We're going to try to do some events in the winter. But by and large, that stadium is going to sit empty until the spring. In hindsight, in retrospect, you got to think, now you can't predict that this sort of thing is going to happen, but you got to think maybe that wasn't the best investment for the city to make at this time.
Yeah, I wish I could speak more to the finances of the city, because I think I mentioned probably on one of the earlier podcasts that we talked about this. You would hope that every city, and I know that that's a hope that's not always a reality, has a rainy day fund to essentially offset the losses you take in a situation like a pandemic, any type of catastrophic event, those sort of things. Now, I know that's not reality, but I obviously I can't speak to whether Wichita does or doesn't. I just
and I know that I can tell you that Wichita is facing a pretty significant budget shortfall, and a lot of that is due to COVID-19. A lot of cities are facing that sort of thing around the country. That it just is going to happen. But you add on that burden of having a baseball stadium sitting empty that's brand new when the revenue that the city was set to make, really the majority of that revenue was going to come from baseball being played. It wasn't going to be coming from some concerts that might happen at the stadium later this fall or this winter. It really came from baseball, and it came from sales tax from businesses around the ballpark, assuming that people were going to be coming out and spending money at local restaurants and retailers. That sort of thing is not going to happen. And so the budget shortfall, the prediction is so bad for Wichita right now because of the pandemic that Wichita is not even going to be opening public pools and splash pads around the city because of the cost, and also because of the pandemic, but because of the cost of operating them. And that's one area where they're saying, look, we can save some money by not opening at all this year. You have this big, beautiful, brand new stadium that just is sitting there, and it's just costing the taxpayers money every single day that it sits empty until next spring. That's just insane.
And I get that. But also, here's the thing. When you build something like a stadium, 1 year, this is not a 1 year plan. You're still hopeful that the long-term plan of increased development around the stadium is still going to be there. There's still obviously, I mean, I can't even begin to just, one season, of course, is going to have a big effect on what they're doing. But that's still one season in the grand scheme of what you hope, revenue is generated for downtown and really the increased development. So you certainly hope that. I don't know if you caught, this was probably a couple weeks ago. I can't remember what we were particularly covering, but we got in on, I had tweeted, and maybe it came from the Keeper of the Games account, but I suggested that they maybe start a premium softball league down there at the Riverfront Stadium. I'm half kidding, half not, but I know if I was living back in Wichita, I would certainly pay a very premium price to play slow pitch softball in a cool stadium like that. That'd be fantastic. I mean, obviously I'm not suggesting that would even do a dent in the damage, but at least you'd get some people down there seeing the stadium, seeing how cool it was. And hey, I'm if someone from Riverfront Stadium is listening, I'm more than happy to help facilitate that.
You'd have to wear the really short athletic shorts and the knee-high socks.
Done.
And a handlebar mustache and a trucker cap and like a natty light. That's the only way that I think you can play slow pitch softball.
Done. If I can do it at Riverfront Stadium, I would absolutely gear up for that one.
There you go. Obviously, there's nothing positive out of this story. I mean, it's a bummer all the way around. It's a bummer for the fans. It's a bummer for the organization. It's a bummer for the city. It's a bummer for the players. It's a bummer for the teams. I do want to read the quote from the Wind Surge managing general partner, Lou Schwechheimer. He says, on behalf of the entire Wichita Wind Surge family and our partners in the Pacific Coast League, we would like to thank the city of Wichita for your love and support. While we are disappointed with today's announcement, during the COVID-19 pandemic, our primary concern has been and remains the health, safety, and well-being of the fans and families entrusted to our care. As we navigate these challenging and unprecedented times together, please know that Wichita Wind Surge baseball has been delayed, not denied. We look forward to working closely with our corporate, community, and philanthropic partners to enhance the quality of life in this great community for generations to come. Our time will come. So, obviously, like you just mentioned, it's not a 1 year plan. You don't build a stadium for 1 year. You don't have a baseball organization at that level for 1 year. You have it for the long haul. You have it for the commitment. So, I think the line that sticks out to me is baseball has been delayed but not denied. And hopefully that's the case for the Wind Surge. But still, it's obviously disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, there was such a big buildup in that. I guess that moment's kind of let down a little bit, but I mean, that moment's going to build back up to next year. And you just hope that, 1 year, as far as the money downfall, you can slide by and hope to make it up in the future.
We aren't the only ones, by the way, that are disappointed by the news today. We have one of our great Twitter followers at Gordo1111 tweeted us a little bit earlier today and said, "How is it possible to have a Major League Baseball season without the minor leagues? This is an outrage. Not once in over 100 years. And because of poor planning and negotiations, this happens. Hashtag where's my wind surge?" And I think overall, that's got to be the sentiments from just about everybody in this city that was excited to watch Wind Surge baseball. I had a partial season ticket package that now we're going to have to figure out refund details and what that's going to look like. And it's just, it's a headache. But at the end of the day, I think the overall sentiment is just disappointment. We knew it was probably going to happen. We're not surprised. We're just kind of disappointed.
Yeah, and I guess really at this point, we just kind of got to really focus on some of the other things that are coming up. I mean, I know it's not minor league baseball, what everyone is hoping for, but the NBC tournament, has been a staple, and it sounds like really, I think no decision really has kind of been made on that yet. They're still working towards being able to do that. By the way, my gut tells me that if Kevin Jinks, and I like Kevin a lot, I've known Kevin for a long time. He's the executive director for NBC Baseball. If he thinks and his organization thinks they can conduct the tournament safely with health protocols in place, I think they will for sure have it. So hopefully that's something to look forward to. Yeah. I don't have any inside knowledge, but that's just what my gut is telling me, that if they can find a way to safely conduct the tournament, I think they will. And I think Riverfront Stadium and the Wind Surge need that too, because I think having folks stream through that stadium is going to just help kind of keep the momentum going. Because that's I think the biggest fear really with all this is that there was great momentum building up to the start of this season. I felt like there was a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz, and you would hate for that to not regenerate at the start of next season when they're really, really needing folks out to the games and to really pack that place full, come next spring. So you hope that things like the NBC and if they can squeeze a concert or I don't know, whatever other type of events they could squeeze in there, I think that's all to the benefit of the Wind Surge in that stadium.
Yeah, between a potential NBC tournament downtown and maybe even a rec league softball league.
That's right.
I don't know if that'll happen, but if you want to spearhead that, I'm sure we could try to get you in touch with the folks at the Wind Surge.
Just need to make a few phone calls, and I would drive down on Wednesdays just for a Wednesday night league or something.
There you go. All right, let's go ahead and transition into our other top story. This was going to be the story that led the show because it's been a story that has led the narrative in not just local and regional news, but even national news, and not just sports news either, but news networks around the country. And it all is originating in Manhattan, Kansas. It's not a topic that I think either you, Weston, or myself relish in discussing, but at the same time, it is happening relatively close to home and it's kind of in our territory, and it's about kind of sports on the peripheral. So we want to make sure that we're at least talking about all the controversy at Kansas State University after student Jaden McNeil tweeted a highly offensive tweet just a few days ago. And then with the response from the athletic community at Kansas State after the fact, what that has generated and where we stand right now. So Weston, I'm going to have you put your lawyer hat on here for a second. I feel like we've had to lean on your profession quite a bit over the last couple of months on this program, but it's definitely a very sticky situation that Kansas State University finds itself in right now.
Yeah. So, I think when this initially came out, I think I was a little not concerned, but I guess curious at what the university was going to do. They're going to be put in a tough position here because essentially you have a student who made a very, I'll use the word unsavory. I know a lot of people could use a lot of different words to describe that tweet, but what the student is describing as a joke that he made, there was not any racial slurs used or vulgar language, and I'm only prefacing that because I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit about legally what the university can do here in the context of that tweet is going to be imperative to what they can and can't do. So I was a little concerned at first. I did think that it sounded like some of the narrative coming from the football players was they wanted this student kicked off campus. And then it kind of shifted, I think, from now, my understanding at the last I had seen, as a football group, as a football team, they had made an announcement that they were going to sit out the season if there was not action taken by the university to basically prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future. Is that your understanding of kind of what their position was, Tommy?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, originally the student athletes came out and said, we're not going to participate at all unless you expel him. And then I don't know exactly how things transpired, but I'm sure that somebody got to them and said, look, like we probably can't expel him legally. That's probably not something we can do. So then I think they went back and they said, okay, well, let's try to figure out a way that maybe there can be some sort of discipline, taken against this student. And then at the same time, institute some sort of policy to prevent this sort of thing from happening again, or to at least give the university some ammunition to be able to take harsher action against anybody who decides that they want to do something like this in the future. That's sort of the understanding that I have about the situation as it stands right now.
Yeah, that's what I think happened too, because I think there were several individual players who were there. The initial reaction was, "Hey, the student needs expelled," and then as a football team, I think where I first saw it was a statement that was put out by Skylar Thompson, the quarterback for K-State, and I think it was a team message. I don't think it was Skylar's message, but I happened to catch his tweet in which they were, I think, asking for the university to basically put policies in effect to prevent this. And so here's where, I want to talk a little bit, because I think this is important, and I get frustrated to some degree because when we talk about the freedom of speech, it gets missed so often. I mean, how often do you hear someone say something, absolutely racist or vulgar or whatever, they get fired from their job, and then they say, oh, what happened to freedom of speech? Well, okay, so the First Amendment, what the Constitution does, it does really two things. It either tells the government what they must do for you or what they can't do for you. So that's where we need to focus here. It's about the government, right? So if you work for a private company, you essentially they're allowed to fire you for whatever reason. That is a private company. The Constitution does not affect your freedom of speech within what they want to do. Now, a public university is a totally different ballgame. That is, in fact, the essence of the government. And so basically, I'm going to give you just a real quick rundown of what this actually looks like, because I think it's so important, because what the K-State players were wanting to do, I completely understand, and I appreciate their approach of coming together and saying, okay, forget this kid. We want to make sure that the university, or Kansas State University, is a better place as a whole moving forward. And I appreciate that sentiment. I really do. But it's important to look at what the university is even going to be able to do. So, I mean, basically, so this is three cases, I guess, I want to just mention real quick. In 1969, the Supreme Court basically said, this is in Tinker versus Des Moines, said that students don't shed the constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. So that was kind of the first case that really said, hey, public, whether it's a high school, public school as a whole, is covered under this First Amendment. And then basically you had another case coming out of Ohio where and this is where it's important what this individual tweeted, because they said that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless that speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action, which is a pretty high standard when you talk about an inflammatory language or speech or tweet.
It's also subjective, wouldn't you say, too, a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And basically, I mean, so if you ask me to actually have a legal opinion on something, right, the old joke with lawyers, and it's not funny because it's just lawyers and we're not funny, but the answer is always, it depends, because these things are incredibly nuanced. It is incredibly fact intensive. And I mean, that's obviously why you can have two very intelligent lawyers and a third party and a judge all coming to different conclusions on the same thing, because they can be so nuanced. But then the only other thing I want to specifically point out, the Supreme Court in 1989 actually looked at essentially something like what is being suggested by the K-State players. In 89, it was the University of Michigan had put in place a speech code And without getting too much into the details, kind of the same thing, saying, hey, you can say these things, you can't say these things. We're considering these things harassing, and we're not going to allow that. And basically, the Supreme Court struck that down as unconstitutional. And they, in particularly there, is actually interesting because it was kind of flipped at the time. It was once the code went into place, there were 20 cases in which white students charged black students with offensive speech. And then that case ended up going through the Supreme Court, and they said, no, this is unconstitutional because you have to be able to protect that speech. So I give you all that, and I know maybe some people are interested and some people aren't. I know that it can be kind of dry, but I think it's so important to know that background before everybody just jumps in with opinions on right, wrong, left, and the other. If you don't understand the framework of what the university can and can't do, I just don't think that you can make a, educated opinion on whatever action they do decide to take here in the next coming month, because you know that they're going to make some sort of action. So, I think that's kind of the framework that we have to look at this through.
Here's where I come at it from all of this. So first things first, this student is a troll. Like, he is just 1,000% a troll. And, it's not the first time that he has made headlines for some of the things that he has said, his opinions on things, jokes that he has made, attention grabbing, spotlight grabbing, far right, white supremacist, white nationalist rhetoric. It's not the first time that this student has used his social media platforms to put this out there. The next thing I'll say is that a lot of times it's better to not feed the troll than it is to respond or let it affect you or whatever. I say all that, though. I also applaud the way that K-State and the student athletes have bonded together. They've come together. They've used their platform. They've used their status, their stature at the university to try to impact change. I think that's a really great way to use your status. It's a really great way to use the skills and the talents that you have, your God-given talents, the talents that you've worked really hard to refine and grow and build over the years, to use that in a responsible way and use it for good to try to impact change. I think that's outstanding. I was talking to a guy that I know the other day, and we were talking about this story, and he made the comment. He goes, the quote unquote joke that the student, which we're not even going to name him, it's not even important to give his name out, but the joke, quote unquote, that the student tweeted, the person I was talking to said, that's probably not something that you want to put on social media. That's probably more of a joke that you would tell amongst your friends. And I looked at him and I said, even then it's in bad taste. Even then, it's not appropriate. Even like there's, and we're not going to get into a big conversation and a big topic about political correctness and freedom of speech and, all of that. But I understand people's perspective when they say this sort of speech should absolutely not be tolerated. But then I also understand the same, different people that say at the same time, we should be able to say whatever we want to say, but then also be able to live with the consequences that are doled out. I'm rambling. I don't really have a point. I think there were a few different things I wanted to say about this. But I will tell you that one thing that is concerning to me about this overall topic is that you're going to find cases of systemic racism in pretty much any kind of institution, whether that's of higher learning, whether that's in a corporate environment. It's going to happen. Like, those things, they've never went away. They're here today in some cases in a lot of different areas. What's concerning to me is that there seems to be a trend at Kansas State University where you're hearing about it more often than in other places. And so I applaud the leadership of the university for saying, look, we've heard too many stories and had too many situations that have come up over the last several years that are concerning enough to us that we have to do something about that. There were stories in the news just a couple of years ago about burning crosses that were found around campus, and, people writing KKK on, white sheets, and they were, just different stories that were happening all around campus. that's concerning to me. And I think that what this student tweeted, I think may have finally been the linchpin to get this university moving in the right direction. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense at all, but that's sort of where I'm landing with all of this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think kind of from my perspective, I think there's a bunch of different ways to handle what's going on, and maybe not even handle is the right word, because really it's just about improving conditions, right? Like that's what we all want. It doesn't matter where you land on the spectrum of this tweet was offensive, this tweet wasn't offensive. This guy should have freedom of speech. This should be, this kind of comment should be curbed. Like I think no matter what stance you take on that, we can all agree improvement is always a good thing, right? So improving the campus, making things better for everyone, I think is always a good thing. But I want to go back because you had said something earlier. You were kind of talking about, this tweet and really the response, how you even respond to a troll that really just kind of gives them more motive than anything. And I was talking with my wife actually at, as we were eating dinner, just about this. And I told her we were going to talk about it on the podcast. And she said, she's like, if you talk about it, if these guys, if any of these players, if they actually were to sit out, like that's letting him win, I mean, that's just giving legs to that this guy and his thoughts matter. Because I mean, if you're a racist, if you're a jerk, if you're a bigot, like your thoughts don't matter to me, and I'm not going to do anything to give you a platform. Now, again, that's why I had mentioned in the beginning, I'm glad that the players kind of took a swerve on their stance a little bit and said, hey, we want to focus on the university as a whole and not just this guy, because he doesn't, I mean, most of these players probably wouldn't, I would actually really be willing to say all the players probably could not point this guy out on campus if they walked right by him, Sure. I mean, just there's just no reason to give him a bigger platform.
And even if they did, they wouldn't care.
Right. Exactly. So, and I think, again, the other thing you said that I really liked, and this is maybe my personal, and again, I understand that people are going to have different feelings on these things, and there's multiple different ways things can be handled or improved or whatever. But I kind of like the approach of, look, if people are going to say things that are, stupid, inappropriate, racist, unsavory, that you don't like, just know that whatever they're saying, there are consequences for that. Now, Yep. As I just kind of mentioned to start this, because that's where I wanted to come from, like there might not be a lot the university, if anything, can do here. But just know all those tweets he's put out there will be there for future employers. They will be there, when he meets some girl he likes and he's got to go meet her dad. I mean, he wants to show up to the party that all the K-State football players are showing up to. Okay, well, he's going to have to live with the consequences of showing up to that party where a bunch of guys may not really like him that are incredible athletes. But, I think for the most part, what I think for these players, again, they can handle it. They're all grown men, so that, however they want to handle it is their business. But I certainly wouldn't want to see any of these guys that, maybe have a shot. A lot of these guys, K-State puts guys in the league all the time, so any one of these players that has a shot to be in the league, you certainly wouldn't want to see them be affected by that. Just for some jamoke kid, to say the least. And granted, I get it. And again, I'm probably rambling like you mentioned you were now too, but I get it. If that's the stance they want to take and go for it, hey, everyone's got their feelings and they feel that's more important than their NFL career. I just, I personally think, hey, boy, I would hate to see, their goals that they have set forth. They've been there for 3 years, 4 years at the university be, just pushed aside because of this kid. So, and with that being said, like you mentioned, K-State's been going through some stuff over the last few years in this category. And you just hope that this really is that kind of final push to say, hey, we've got to do something, we've got to be better. And hopefully you see the university. And the other thing too, is for this one kid who tweeted something so inappropriate, I have seen a ton of outpour positive comments from seems like obviously K-State fans mostly, supporting the football team, saying we appreciate what you all are doing. Of course, there are some people that aren't happy with it, but for the most part, it all seems positive. So it does kind of seem like that is one guy. Hopefully that is a minority view that would tweet or say something so, unsavory or insensitive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll just sum it up like this before we move on. So, my personal feeling is this kid can say whatever he wants, and he is protected by freedom of speech to say that. But at the same time, there are going to be consequences, whether that's official consequences from the university or, some secondary consequences, some of which, you mentioned a few minutes ago, he's going to have to live with that. And at the same time, also, I think one of the biggest reasons why the students stood up and spoke up the way that they did wasn't necessarily because of what he said directly. I think that's part of it, but I think it was also the lack of, in their minds, the lack of direct consequences that potentially could be impacting him. They're just really, I think in their minds, like, really there's nothing that the university can do. And that makes us upset. We're not going to play unless the university in the future can find a way to take some action. They can find a way to be better, to move, the conditions forward, for those who are minorities on campus. So I think that's kind of how I would sum it up. And that's kind of where I fall. The other thing I'll say about it before we move on is that I really feel like I don't even need to go to law school. Like, I've gotten a great law school education from you over the last couple of months. Like, I could go up and probably argue before a judge right now, just from all the advice you've given me.
Well, I guess I'll add two things. I probably haven't. I guess I've argued in front of an administrative judge, but I haven't been in front of an actual judge in probably 2 years. And secondly, I definitely do not practice constitutional law. Took 1 year of con law in law school and haven't touched the topic since. So I definitely had to kind of do some refresh before we went into that.
There you go. And that's like our official disclaimer,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. That's
nothing in here to be construed as actual legal advice from Weston Mills.
That's right. And if we do have any other listener or lawyers listening to the podcast, they may be going, "Oh, no. This case came down in 2012 that changes everything Weston said. I didn't see anything out there." But, I may very well miss, because I certainly don't practice in that area. But, I guess it's just, I did want to kind of bring that aspect to the podcast today, because I think without getting too far into it, when in today's climate, I think there are a lot of folks that get frustrated by people that push information, whether it's just speaking off, the cuff of their sleeve or whatever, that is just incorrect. It's like, okay, if we disagree on something, but we're both coming from it with, the same set of facts and understanding of what can and can't be, then okay, that's fine. We disagree. But I think people get very frustrated and things get really out of hand when we don't even have an understanding of, what the law says, or what can or can't be, or what the facts of something were. So I just thought that would probably be a little bit of an important to kind of bring that to the forefront when we talk about this conversation.
It's definitely an interesting situation. It's not, again, it's kind of like the minor league baseball story. Like, there's really not a whole lot of positive to pull out of this, because it really is a sticky situation in Manhattan. But we felt like it was the right thing to do to at least bring it up and talk about it. What do you say we move on? You good with that?
Well, I do want to say it did feel like this was kind of the K-State's football team's remember the Titans moment, as a team that came together. And I don't know, that is literally my all-time favorite movie. So that was kind of a cool, I don't know, I guess a positive maybe that came out of it is you kind of just get the feeling that probably as a team, they probably bonded like they haven't ever bonded before.
They're going to have to come out of the tunnel doing, strong side, left side, or whatever that chant was from the movie. Yeah. That'd be great. All right, let's go ahead and move on and talk more football. We're going to just mention this briefly. We have a couple other things we want to talk about on the program. Cam Newton is now a New England Patriot. He signed with the Patriots a 1-year deal. It's the league minimum, which is crazy that he's going to the Patriots for that little amount of money. Obviously, he's coming off an injury that basically kind of led his way out of Carolina, for lack of a better word. My only question for you, Weston, like I said, we're not going to talk about this long. I just want to get your gut reaction. Cam Newton joining the Patriots, are they a threat to the Chiefs this coming season in the AFC?
No. I wouldn't even be surprised if Jared Stidham still starts over Cam Newton. Like that
really?
That was Belichick's. For anybody who pretends like they can predict Bill Belichick, they're just wrong and they're lying to you. But Stidham was his guy, and Cam, we just have not seen him. But of course, if Cam in 2020 can be what Cam was in 2015, he's incredible, but I still, even just that, I think that roster as a whole has some problems. I don't even think if you get 2015 Cam, I don't think that makes them a top 5 team in the NFL. Right there, if it's prime Cam, but probably not top 5. I think I'm still much more worried about the Bucs, especially with the rumors that Antonio Brown might be landing there.
So do you think that, without Cam, if it was just, Jared Stidham leading the Patriots this upcoming season, are they a 500 team? Do they win 9 or 10 games? If you're not concerned about them threatening the Chiefs in the AFC, then where do you put them?
I think 500 or slightly better. Belichick's a great coach. He is. But you can, as a football coach, you can only do so much. You still have to have the players. And I think Stidham can be good. I think Belichick elevates quarterbacks like no other coach does. But you saw what Brady did with that roster last year. Like their record was good, but I still think they overperformed. They had a very soft schedule. And I think that was kind of a product to get to that 12 win mark or whatever they were at. But I just don't. I think this team is going to be competitive because Belichick won't never be not competitive. But I think 8, maybe 9 wins is what you're looking at, and maybe 10 if it's prime Cam, maybe.
Interesting. All right. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Cam Newton looks like he'll be joining the New England Patriots, replacing Tom Brady if he wins the starting role over Jared Stidham in New England. So definitely interesting, and wanted to get your thoughts on that. Let's go ahead and get right in to the Wichita Whiparound for this episode of Keeper of the Game. So we talked about this briefly on the episode last week. We didn't have time to talk about it much, but I want to get into it and talk about it here today. And it's about the Wichita Open golf tournament. So obviously the Wichita Open is rescheduled now for September at Crestview Country Club. This article in the Wichita Business Journal talks all about how despite everything going on with the pandemic and with the Wichita Open, they're having a pretty decent time finding sponsors. It's happening okay for them. There's a couple new sponsors that came on board, a couple new charitable organizations that are on board to help sponsor the Wichita Open. Does that surprise you at all? Obviously, this is a very popular tournament. It's been around for a long time in Wichita at multiple different golf courses all around the city. It seems like people, despite what's going on in the city with the pandemic, are still willing to donate and help the cause for the Wichita Open.
Yeah, I think that really is what a lot of this is about. There's a lot of people that take a lot of pride in Wichita, and being able to keep such a fun event in Wichita probably is going to take this year, some significant support. And what I didn't see, I'm curious. And maybe it was in the article and I missed it, but is there any type of, hey, look, if you continue to support us this year, we're going to lock you in at the rate for your sponsorship for the year after that, or maybe there's some sort of deal. But ultimately, I think it's a lot of pride in Wichita, a lot of folks that want to continue to be associated with that, and just truly want to keep the Wichita Open at the Crestview Country Club and the fun and excitement that it's always been. And I think it probably takes a little bit of blind donation and blind money going to a sponsorship that you may not know has much of return in value.
Yeah, shout out to Roy Turner and his crew who plan the Wichita Open every year. This is a guy that, he has been able to come in and just do a really good job at making sure that the tournament stays at the level that it needs to be at each and every year. And one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize about the Wichita Open is how the sponsorships work. So rather than there being one major title sponsor, which you see that all the time, even at the highest, levels with the PGA, like this weekend is the Rocket Mortgage Classic. You see that huge title sponsor dropping a ton of money. That's not the way the Wichita Open works. They have what they call ambassadors, and it's multiple organizations at smaller price points where they come in and they're all spending the money that way. And so the two newest ambassadors are the Augie Navarro Scholarship Foundation and Central Power Systems and Services. So Augie Navarro was the golf pro at Sim Park Golf Course from 1962 to 1993. His sons, Rick Navarro and Gary Navarro, they are with MV Purchasing. I'm grateful enough to be able to, I've sat in their box, the MV Purchasing box at the Wichita Open before. They're great people. They're super philanthropic in the community. They're great ambassadors, not just for the city, but for the tournament as well. And so I just think that having these organizations that are able to come in and say, all right, yeah, like we want to be involved, we can do it at a smaller price point. I think that opens the door for more organizations to be able to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will mention, so little, I guess, fun connection to me here that I didn't realize was Central Power System and Service was a former client of mine at my previous law firm.
Oh, very cool. So we've got some connections that way, I suppose.
Absolutely. And they're real good folk too. Robin Roberts is CEO over there, worked with him. He's, a golf guy, I'm sure they were excited to kind of keep this being involved as well. So fun.
I think a lot of people, that maybe are not super involved in golf or know much about golf at all or care about golf at all, I don't think they really realize the prominence that the Wichita Open has on the Korn Ferry Tour. It was named the Korn Ferry Tour's Tournament of the Year in 2019. It's one of 4 remaining stops to play in all 31 years that tour has existed. I mean, going all the way back to when it was the Ben Hogan Tour, then it was the Nike Tour, then it was the Nationwide Tour, the Web.com Tour, now it's the Korn Ferry Tour. One of only 4 stops that's been played every year since the tour has been around. And it's delivered almost $1.5 million to local charities also, which is just incredible. And so, I will say that we have read and we have discussed and we have talked about a ton of negative sports news in the Wichita area over the last couple of months or so because of COVID. It's nice to read some positive news about some local sports, still being able to get sponsors, still being able to help those less fortunate, and really being able to provide a top-notch event each and every year. It's incredible to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had mentioned it last time we talked about the Wichita Open, but I think I'm going to have to, get down and attend one of these events. Probably won't be this year, obviously, but hopefully in the near future.
It's a lot of fun. I've said this before on this podcast, but I'm not sure that there is a better overall sporting event in Wichita. I think the only one that maybe rivals it is when the NCAA tournament came to Wichita, because that was just such a spectacle. But other than that, year in and year out, as far as an annual sports event in the city, I might be missing something, but at least in my mind and for my money, I'm not sure anything is better than the Wichita Open. And I know that we've had some conversations with, or at least I have, some folks from the Wichita Open, and hopefully closer to the tournament, we can get them on the podcast. I'd love to be involved in some way and help promote the Wichita Open on this podcast more often as we get closer to it, because I'm such a big fan. Yeah, and great for Wichita to show that they can continually host, a national sporting event, essentially. I mean, with the NCAA tournament and, the Wichita Open, it's the cornferry.com or the Korn Ferry Tour, that is a national event that they're hosting, and do so well. You hope that continues to kind of open eyes to folks on a national level that, hey, Wichita's a great stop to hold an event. Absolutely. So that's our Wichita Whip Around on this episode of Keeper of the Games. All right. So we do have a Finally Funny. Typically at this moment, we talk about that. We are going to do one. We're going to do a Finally Funny here in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, something that I'm really excited about, we've got a few minutes left on the show before we wrap up. So obviously this weekend is the 4th of July. It's Independence Day. And I would say it's really cliche, Weston, to talk about like best sports moments that are patriotic. Like you can look at any Olympic game, or you can look at Ryder Cup, in golf, or you can look at some of these other, national type deals, World Baseball Classics. And, there are a lot of huge patriotic sports events, or even like great national anthem performances. That's really cliche. We're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a little bit more of a niche area, the best patriotic sports moments in movies. If you can think of any. I've got a couple off the top of my head, but is there a movie, is there a film in your mind that you think of when you think of 4th of July, patriotic America in film as it deals with sports?
I have to imagine to some degree I'm probably gonna steal maybe one that was on your list, but
that's
absolutely what I think of, and I think of it on the 4th of July every year, not even just as this moment as you're asking me, but the scene in Sandlot when they're playing baseball on the 4th of July. I think it's America the Beautiful is playing in the background. Like that absolutely to me jumps off the page right away as like probably the most patriotic moment.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my number one. I mean, you've got Ray Charles in the background, and he's singing America the Beautiful, and you've got them playing the only night game of the entire summer, and they're running through the buffet, and they're making hot dogs, and the sparklers are going off in the street, and they're running back and they're playing baseball. And what I love about that, and it takes me back to my childhood, is you're playing with your friends, whether you're playing baseball or playing tag or whatever, you're playing with them on the 4th of July, and all of a sudden the fireworks show starts and you just stop everything you're doing and you just look up and you see the fireworks. And that happens exactly like that in the Sandlot. And it's giving me chills right now to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, especially, and maybe we've been shifting away from this, but, baseball is, it's always been said it's America's pastime. And it just truly is. To me, that scene represents kind of the 4th of July. Like that's what it's all about. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time too. So of course I had to go that route. But what other ones did you have, knowing that I took your number one?
Sure. Well, there are some honorable mentions. So I wasn't going to rank them, but I was going to say, here are my honorable mentions. And then obviously the Sandlot was number one. We'll just go in the opposite direction. So some of the honorable mentions, how about when Rocky beats Drago in Rocky IV?
Oh,
Come on, taking down Drago in the Soviet Union in Rocky IV, that's got to be an honorable mention right there. And, he's draped with the American flag, Rocky is, and that's got to be a big one for sure. How about this one for an honorable mention? This is one that maybe not a lot of people think of because it, is maybe more, satire than anything else. But how about when Ricky Bobby beats Gene Gerard in Talladega Nights?
That's fantastic. I love it. That's right. That is like, that movie was very American, if you will. That's absolutely. I think so. I'll switch sports here. Well, I mean, we went baseball to boxing to NASCAR, I suppose.
Yep. And is there anything more patriotic than just NASCAR in general? I'm not sure that there is.
Absolutely not. Hey, and by the way, two of our listeners that listen, I think quite a bit, Kelsey and Austin Knipp, they had specifically asked me if we could get a little bit more NASCAR on the podcast. So I'm counting this. We got some NASCAR in the podcast.
There you go.
But going, circling back to what we were talking about, another one, the speech from Herb Brooks in Miracle, when he's saying, great moments aren't born, or I'm going to butcher it, but I mean, that whole scene just before they go out, oh my gosh, that's an incredible, just kind of gets you going, gets you excited.
Well, and that's probably that the whole Miracle on Ice situation. I mean, shifting away from movies, that's probably one of, if not the most patriotic sports moments of all time, back in the 1980 Olympics. Now, obviously, Miracle is the film, that documented all of that, in a dramatic way. But no, I totally agree. That's got to be on that list for sure.
How about, and so here's one of my other favorite movies. How about Mighty Ducks 2? When they go to the
together.
Yes, when they go to the Junior Goodwill games and beat Russia. That was pretty, especially after Coach Bombay had, he got his NHL or minor league hockey career ended by the coach for Russia. And oh man, what a movie! Watch that one 100 times as well.
Now, a lot of people might say, and before we move on to our Finally Funny, I just want to get this in. A lot of people might say that what the Ducks did, now obviously they won and they won for their country, but what the Ducks did to win might not be patriotic. Like they took off their USA jerseys and they put on their Ducks jerseys. Like they said, hey, look, we're not gonna wear the red, white, and blue anymore. We're gonna wear the green. And they won. They did win for their country, but they won wearing their green and not the red, white, and blue. That's got to be a little divisive, wouldn't you say?
I can understand the controversy, but I would just compare the Ducks jersey as like the camo. It's the camo that they're sporting for the battle. It's not so much couldn't rock the colors. It was just throwing them off a little bit. So needed their camos, their Ducks jerseys on.
All right. So how about we say that number one of all time has got to be The Sandlot. You and I are both in agreement on that.
Yep.
Then some honorable mention: Rocky IV,
yep,
Miracle,
yep,
Talladega Nights,
yeah, for sure,
and then of course D2, The Mighty Ducks. That work for you?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure we're missing some. And before we move on, I do want to add one of my favorite actual sport events, Patriotic Moments. How about when Joey Chestnut took down Kobayashi to finally bring the hot dog eating contest back to the Americans? Or in 2018, when he ate 74 hot dogs to set the world record of just breaking his own record. But gotta love the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. That is one of the most patriotic sporting events, if you will, that I like every year.
I can't promise that I'm going to eat 74 hot dogs this weekend, but I think I'll probably eat a lot of hot dogs this weekend. I wouldn't be surprised.
How about
if we're go ahead.
I was just saying, how about you just shoot for like between 4 and 7,
Yeah, that'll work. That's probably good. Hey, if you've got any, if you're listening and you have any, major movie sporting patriotic events that we might have missed, let us know. Like tweet us at CogPod, at KOGPod. Let us know if we missed anything. And we'd be happy to look at that. I mean, I'm not going to say that you're right, but at least we'll take a look at that in case we missed anything. Before we wrap up, let's take a look at that Finally Funny. Weston, you've got one. What is it?
Yeah, so as everyone has, I'm sure, heard, Governor Laura Kelly mandating masks in the state of Kansas. There is a mask that's floating around up here in Kansas City, and I don't know if folks have seen this on Twitter in Wichita. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't, but there are masks being sold, and I'll have to find out who's selling them. I think it's Wonder Boy, but they are masks that say, "Help keep Patrick Mahomes safe. Wear a mask." I'm all in on that. I'll make sure to tweet that picture from the CogPod Twitter account.
Hey, if I wasn't down to wear a mask before, when you put it that way, I might have to start wearing one, which I'm going to anyway. But the fact that, I never thought about it. Hey, I'm going to keep Patrick Mahomes safe. He's a national treasure. We've got to keep the man safe.
It's a message we can all get behind.
I think that's one thing, regardless what side of the aisle you're on, what political, side you're siding with on all of this,
right.
At least we know that we can all agree on keeping Patrick Mahomes safe.
That's right. We got to get another Super Bowl.
There you go.
3 or 4 or 5. I don't want to sell us short.
It's a dynasty. We want to make sure that he's safe for the next 20 years. Let's go ahead and say that.
Absolutely.
That's going to wrap up Keeper of the Games for this episode. Again, make sure to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode, you will get a notification. Again, you can listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, many others out there. Anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, you can find us there. Of course, you can go to our website, cogpod.weebly.com. You can watch full episodes there on our website or also on YouTube and Facebook just by searching for Keeper of the Games. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. And just another quick shout out to our sponsor, Title Boxing Club at 21st and Rock Road in the shops at Tallgrass. Make sure to go check them out and start getting in shape today with Title Boxing Club. So with that, Weston, I hope you have an awesome 4th of July weekend, man.
Absolutely. Hot dogs are in the future.
There you go. Remind folks of your Twitter handle.
At WMills94.
All right. So mine is, by the way, at Tweets from Tommy. So you can follow us there. For Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor. We all hope you have a great Independence Day weekend. Thank you so much for checking out Keeper of the Games.
Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at COGPod. That's KOG Pod.